Pull up a chair, honey. Go on, sit yourself down. I just finished a fresh batch of peppermint tea, and the steam is rising off it just the way I like. There's a bit of a breeze coming through the screen door today, carrying the scent of the honeysuckle that's finally decided to bloom over the back fence. It's a peaceful sound, isn't it? Just the cicadas humming and the occasional creak of this old wicker chair. But my heart hasn't always been this quiet. No, ma'am, not by a long shot. No, people in this town look at me and they see Mama June. They see the woman who brings the extra large potato salad to the church social, and the one who always has a spare sweater in the trunk of her car, just in case someone gets a chill. They think they know me. They think they know my pockets, too. In a small town like Oakhaven, people have a way of measuring you by what they see on the outside, the car you drive, the house you keep, the way you tip at the diner. But I've always believed that the most important work a person does is the work nobody sees. My late husband, Hank, bless his soul, he's been gone 7 years now. He used to say, "June, a gift isn't a gift if you're waiting for a thank you note to make it feel real." That's how we lived. We weren't rich, not by the standards of those folks over in the new development with the 3-car garages and the manicured lawns. Hank worked the floor at the paper mill for 40 years, and I spent my life teaching 3rd grade, wiping runny noses, and helping children find the magic in a library book. We saved, we tucked away, and every single month for 30 years we gave. Our heart was always with the Grace Center. You know the place, that big, old Victorian house on the edge of town that serves as a sanctuary for foster children who are waiting for their forever homes. It was a cause dear to Hank's heart because he'd been one of those boys once. He knew what it felt like to have your whole life packed into a single trash bag, moving from one stranger's house to another. So we gave. Sometimes it was $50. Sometimes, in the good years when the mill gave out a bonus, it was $500. After Hank passed, and I got the life insurance and the pension, I started giving more. A lot more, but I did it quietly. I'd just mail a check in a plain white envelope, addressed to the director, Miss Martha. Miss Martha was a jewel. She'd send me a little handwritten note every time. "June, this bought 3 new winter coats," or "June, this paid for a little girl's first piano lesson." That was all I needed. I'd tuck those notes into a big blue accordion folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my roll-top desk, right next to our tax returns and the deed to the house. I called it my heart folder. It wasn't for bragging. It was just so I could look at it on the days I felt lonely and remember that Hank and I were still doing some good in this world. But things changed 2 years ago. Miss Martha retired, her knees finally gave out on her, and the board brought in someone new. Someone modern. Her name was Tiffany Vance. Now, I don't like to judge a book by its cover. I really don't. But Tiffany Vance walked into Oakhaven like she was doing us all a favor by breathing our air. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with hair so blonde and straight it looked like it had been ironed. And she wore these suits that probably cost more than my first car. She didn't want to talk about the children's favorite bedtime stories. She wanted to talk about branding and outreach and high net worth donor acquisition. The first time I met her, I'd gone down to the center to drop off a bag of hand-knitted scarves. I'd spent all winter making them. Tiffany looked at the bag like it was full of wet garbage. "Oh, how quaint," she said, her voice sounding like honey poured over gravel. "We're actually moving toward a more curated aesthetic for our children, June. We have a corporate partnership with a luxury children's boutique now. But I suppose we can put these in the discard pile for the local thrift shop." It stung, honey. It stung deep. But I just smiled patted her hand, which she pulled away real quick, and said, "Well, I'm sure someone's neck will be warm because of them." I didn't stop my monthly checks, though. I wasn't giving for Tiffany Vance. I was giving for the ghosts of the boys Hank used to be. I kept sending my checks, $500 every month, like clockwork. And every tax season, my accountant, Mr. Henderson, would dutifully record those donations. Over the last 5 years, since Hank passed, I'd given over $30,000. To me, that's a fortune. That's the new roof fund. That's the emergency surgery fund. But I gave it gladly. The trouble started this past spring, right around the time of the Silver Oak Gala. That's the center's biggest fundraiser of the year. Usually, it's a potluck in the gym, but Tiffany turned it into a black tie affair at the country club. Tickets were $200 apiece. I bought one, even though I didn't have a tuxedo, and I certainly didn't have a high net worth friend to bring along. I wore my best navy blue lace dress, the one I wore to my niece's wedding, and I pinned on the pearl brooch Hank gave me for our 25th anniversary. When I walked into that ballroom, I felt like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. The room was dripping in white lilies and sparkling cider served in crystal flutes. Tiffany was front and center, wearing a dress that looked like it was made of liquid silver. She was surrounded by the movers and shakers, the mayor, the owners of the new tech startup, the developers. I saw her point at me and whisper something to a woman standing next to her, the wife of the town's wealthiest developer, Mrs. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling looked at me with a sort of pitying smirk. Later that evening, during the presentation, Tiffany got up on stage. She started talking about the new era of giving. She pulled up a slide on a giant screen that listed the top 50 benefactors of the Grace Center. I looked for my name, not because I wanted the glory, Lord knows I don't, but because I wanted to see if they'd included Hank. I'd asked them to list it as the Hank and June Miller legacy. My name wasn't there. The Sterlings were there. The mayor was there. Even the local car dealership was there. But no Miller. I leaned over to a neighbor, Brenda, who's been on the board for years. "Brenda," I whispered, "did they maybe forget the M section on that list?" Brenda looked at me, and her face went a little tight. She leaned in close. "June, dear, Tiffany said the list was strictly for those who have made significant, verifiable contributions in the last 24 months. She said she checked the books 3 times. My heart did a little stutter step. Significant. Brenda, I send $500 every single month. That's $6,000 a year. That's more than some of the folks on that screen." Brenda sighed, looking uncomfortable. "Tiffany says the records from the old administration were a mess. She says there's no record of your checks being cashed into the operating fund. She told the board she thinks you might be one of those legacy pretenders." "A what?" I felt the heat rising up my neck, turning my skin as red as a Georgia tomato. "A legacy pretender," Brenda whispered, looking away. "Someone who talks a big game about how much they support the charity to get social standing in town, but never actually puts their money where their mouth is." She told the local paper society columnist that Oakhaven is full of well-meaning ladies who think a bag of old yarn counts as a donation. I felt like I'd been slapped, right there in the middle of the ballroom, with the string quartet playing a fancy waltz and the smell of expensive lilies in the air. I felt the ground crumbling under my sensible heels. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just turned around, walked out of those double doors, and drove my old Buick home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel so hard I had to pull over twice just to breathe. The next morning, it was worse. The Oakhaven Gazette had a feature on the gala, and there, in the society notes, by a young woman who'd who'd clearly been charmed by Tiffany, was a paragraph that made my blood run cold. Director Tiffany Vance spoke candidly about the challenges of clearing out the dead wood from the donor list. We found many instances of community members claiming to be major supporters, whose actual financial impact was nil, Vance said. It's a shame when people use the name of a charity to bolster their own reputation without actually contributing to the children's welfare. We are looking into whether some of these individuals have been misrepresenting their charitable giving on public records. She didn't name me, not in print, but in Oakhaven, you don't have to name someone for everyone to know who you're talking about. By noon, the phone started ringing. It was the sympathy calls. You know, the kind where people call to check on you, but they're really just fishing for the gossip. June, honey, I saw that article, Sarah from the bakery said. I told everyone. Our June would never lie about giving money to the orphans. But you know how people talk. They're saying you've been claiming those donations on your taxes for years, just to get a bigger refund, even though the center hasn't seen a dime. They say the IRS might be looking at you. I sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper spread out before me, and I felt a coldness I hadn't felt since the day of Hank's funeral. It wasn't just about the money. It was about my name. It was about Hank's name. We had spent our lives being honest people. We didn't have much, but we had our word. And this woman, this modern director with her liquid silver dress, was trying to paint me as a liar and a thief in the only town I've ever called home. I looked at that newspaper. Then I looked at the bottom drawer of my roll-top desk. I thought about that blue accordion folder. I didn't cry. My mama always told me that tears are for when you're hurt, but fire is for when you're being wronged. And honey, I was starting to feel a flicker of a flame in my chest. I stood up, walked over to that desk, and pulled out the folder. I sat there for 4 hours. I didn't even turn on the lights as the sun went down. I just sat in the twilight, going through every single piece of paper. I had the carbon copies of every check I'd written. I had the bank statements showing the money leaving my account. I had the thank you notes from Miss Martha, dated and signed, for every year up until she left. And then I found the more recent ones, the ones from the last 2 years. I had the bank statements showing the $500 leaving my account every month, made out to the Grace Center. But there were no thank you notes for those. Instead, I found something else. I looked at the back of the canceled check images my bank sends me every month. On the back of the checks from the last year, the ones Tiffany Vance had been in charge of the endorsement stamp wasn't the usual Grace Center operating fund. It was a different stamp. It was faint, almost hard to read, but it said Grace Center Special Development Initiative. I'd never heard of a special development initiative. I called Mr. Henderson, my accountant. He's a man of few words, mostly because he spends all his time looking at numbers, but he's as sharp as a tack. June, he said, his voice crackling over the line. I've seen your receipts. I've filed your taxes based on the proof you provided. If that woman is claiming you haven't donated, then either your bank is hallucinating or she is. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to pull every tax return I've filed for the last 10 years. I need you to print out every single charitable deduction. And then I want you to meet me at the bank. I want to see exactly where those special development checks were cashed. You fixin' to cause trouble, June? He asked. No, sir, I said, looking at a photo of Hank on the mantel. He was smiling, wearing his mill uniform, looking so proud of the life we'd built. I'm fixin' to finish it. Next few days were hard. I went to the grocery store, and people avoided my eyes in the frozen food aisle. Mrs. Sterling actually turned her cart around and went down the baking aisle just to avoid passing me. I heard the whispers. Tax fraud, they said. Hypocrite, they whispered. My bridge club postponed our weekly meeting without setting a new date. It's amazing how fast a town can turn on you when a shiny new person tells a convincing lie. People love a fall from grace. They love to think that the good person was secretly bad all along. It makes them feel better about their own flaws, I suppose. But I stayed quiet. I didn't defend myself on Facebook. I didn't call the paper. I just gathered my papers. I went to the bank and sat with the manager, Mr. Gable, in his glass-walled office. We looked at the Special Development Initiative account. My heart nearly stopped when he told me. June, Mr. Gable said, looking over his spectacles. That account isn't part of the center's main audit. It was opened 18 months ago by Tiffany Vance. She's the only signatory. It's listed as a discretionary fund for outreach and travel. Travel, I asked. For foster children. Well, Mr. Gable said, his face darkening. The expenses listed on this account. They aren't for children. There are charges for high-end restaurants in the city, boutique hotels, and several trips to luxury spas. It seems the special development was mostly developing Miss Vance's wardrobe and lifestyle. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling a mixture of horror and a strange, cold clarity. She hadn't just shamed me. She had been stealing from the children. My $500 a month, and who knows how many others, had been paying for her liquid silver dresses and her ironed hair. She thought I was an easy target. She thought because I was an old woman in a lace dress, I wouldn't have the records. She thought I'd just fade away into the background, too embarrassed by her legacy pretender labels to fight back. She didn't know about the blue folder. She didn't know that when a Southern woman has 30 years of receipts and a husband's memory to protect, she's more dangerous than a hornet's nest in July. I looked at Mr. Gable. I'm going to need copies of everything. Every check, every endorsement, every charge on that account. June, I can't give you the full account details without a board order or subpoena, he said softly. But I can give you the copies of your canceled checks and the proof of which account they were deposited into. That'll do, I said. That'll do just fine. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I didn't just want to clear my name. I wanted to make sure she could never do this to another child or another donor ever again. I realized that if she was doing this to me, she was doing it to others, the small donors, the ones who didn't have high net worth, the ones Tiffany thought were too quaint to matter. I found out there was a public board meeting scheduled for Tuesday night. It was meant to be a victory lap for Tiffany, a presentation of the gala's record-breaking earnings. The whole town was invited. I spent Tuesday morning at the hair salon. If I was going to a fight, I was going to look like a lady. Miss Dot gave me a fresh set, and I wore my pearls, the real ones. I polished my shoes, and I tucked the blue folder under my arm. As I walked toward the town hall that evening, I saw the lights shining bright. I saw the cars, the Sterling's Mercedes, the mayor's SUV. I saw Tiffany Vance standing on the steps, greeting people with that fake, gravelly, honey laugh. She saw me coming. She didn't think I'd show. I saw her eyes widen for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of fear crossing her face before she masked it with a condescending smile. "June," she called out, loud enough for the group around her to hear. "How brave of you to come. I know things have been awkward since the gala, but we always welcome our community elders, even if they're only here for the refreshments." The people around her chuckled. My heart pounded in my chest, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that sounded like a drum. I felt Hank's presence right there beside me, steady and calm. "Oh, I'm not here for the punch, Tiffany," I said, my voice carrying clear through the evening air. I'm here for the audit. She laughed, a sharp, metallic sound. The audit? Darling, the audit is for people with a stake in the organization. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a meeting to start. She turned her back on me. I didn't move. I just stood there at the bottom of the steps, clutching my blue folder. You're right, Tiffany, I said to her back. The audit is for people with a stake. And I've got 30,000 stakes in that building. And I think it's time we talk about where they went. The crowd went silent. The air felt heavy, like the moment right before a summer storm breaks. Tiffany froze. She turned back around, her face pale under the streetlights. I don't know what you're talking about, she hissed. I think you do, I said. And I think the IRS is going to be real interested to know why my charitable donations, which I've got every single bank record for, ended up paying for your weekend at the Ritz-Carlton. The murmur that went through the crowd was like the sound of a rushing river. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked right past her, up those steps, and into the hall. The meeting was about to begin, and I was fixin' to give the most important lesson of my life. The town hall was packed. It felt like every soul in Oakhaven had squeezed into those wooden pews. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and old wood, and the low hum of 100 whispered conversations. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking on the floor. Every head turned. I saw the Sterling family in the front row, looking at me like I was a ghost. I saw Brenda, the board member, looking worried. I didn't sit down. I walked right up to the front, to the table where the board members were seated. Tiffany Vance was already there, shuffling papers, her hands moving a little too fast. She tried to look busy, tried to look like I wasn't there, but I could see the vein in her neck pulsing. The chairman of the board, a decent enough man named Mr. Whitaker, cleared his throat and tapped his gavel. All right, everyone, let's settle down. We have a lot to get through. This has been a banner year for the Grace Center, and we're here to celebrate our successes. He started going through the agenda, the building repairs, the new staffing. Tiffany stood up to give the financial report. She pulled up a colorful graph on the screen, showing a massive spike in corporate engagement. As you can see, Tiffany said, her voice regaining its confidence, by streamlining our donor list and focusing on high-impact partnerships, we've increased our liquid assets by 40%. We've moved away from the disorganized methods of the past. No more shoebox accounting. We are a professional organization now. She looked directly at me when she said shoebox accounting. I waited. I let her finish her whole speech. She talked for 20 minutes about synergy and vision. When she finally sat down, looking very pleased with herself, Mr. Whitaker asked, "Are there any questions from the floor?" I stood up. "I have a question, Mr. Whitaker," I said. The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on a velvet rug. Tiffany sighed loudly. "Mr. Whitaker, really, we have a lot to cover. We don't have time for personal grievances or confusion from the gallery." "I'm not confused, Tiffany," I said, stepping forward. I laid the blue folder on the table right in front of Mr. Whitaker. "I'm concerned. You see, I've been hearing a lot of talk lately. Talk that I haven't been supporting the center. Talk that I'm a legacy pretender who lies on her tax returns." Mr. Whitaker looked uncomfortable. "June, this isn't the place for—" "Oh, it's exactly the place," I interrupted. "Because if I'm a liar, then the IRS is going to come for me. But if I'm not a liar, then there's $30,000 of mine, and who knows how much of other people's that's gone missing from your professional books." I opened the folder. I pulled out the first document, a certified letter from my bank. "Mr. Whitaker," I said, "this is a record of 60 consecutive months of $500 checks made out to the Grace Center. All cashed, all cleared." Tiffany jumped up. Those records are from the old administration. I already told you, the books were a mess. These checks, I said, raising my voice just a notch, were cashed between January of last year and last month. Right under your watch, Tiffany. But here's the interesting part. I pulled out the copies of the backs of the checks, the ones I'd gotten from Mr. Gable. These checks weren't deposited into the Grace Center Operating Fund. They were deposited into an account called the Special Development Initiative, an account that isn't listed on your financial report tonight, an account that, according to the bank, only has one name on it, Tiffany Vance. The room erupted. People were leaning out of their seats, trying to see the papers. Mr. Whittaker took the copies from my hand, his face turning a grayish color. He looked at the checks. Then he looked at the report Tiffany had just given. Tiffany, he asked, his voice low and dangerous. What is the Special Development Initiative? Tiffany's face went from pale to a blotchy, angry purple. It's a discretionary fund for networking. You can't get the Sterlings and the mayors of the world to give money by serving them potluck casserole. I had to take them to dinner. I had to travel to conferences. It's all perfectly legal. Is it? I asked. Is it legal to use the money I gave for children's winter coats to pay for a $300 consultation at the Willow Springs Day Spa? Because I have the merchant codes right here from your account activity. I pulled out the last set of papers, the ones Mr. Henderson had helped me organize. I didn't just bring my bank records, I said to the room. I brought my tax returns. For 10 years, I've declared these donations. And for 10 years, the Grace Center under Miss Martha sent me a receipt. But for the last 2 years, I didn't get a receipt. I thought it was just modern efficiency. But now I see. You couldn't give me a receipt because that money wasn't going to the center. It was going to you. Mrs. Sterling stood up in the front row. Wait a minute. I gave $5,000 last summer for the new playground fund. I never saw a playground. And I gave for the music program. Someone else shouted from the back. The dam broke. Tiffany tried to shout over the noise. You're all small-minded. You don't understand what it takes to run a modern nonprofit. You should be thanking me for putting this town on the map. We were already on the map, Tiffany, I said, looking her straight in the eye. We were the town that took care of its own. You're the one who tried to turn us into a backdrop for your vanity. Mr. Whittaker hammered his gavel until the room quieted down, but the air was still vibrating with anger. He looked at Tiffany, and for the first time, he didn't see a visionary. He saw a thief. Tiffany Vance, he said, his voice trembling with rage. You will leave this podium immediately. The board will be conducting an emergency audit starting tonight, and we will be contacting the authorities. You can't fire me, she screamed. I have a contract. I think you'll find that embezzlement voids just about any contract in the state of Georgia, Mr. Whittaker said. Tiffany grabbed her designer bag, her face a mask of pure, ugly spite. She looked at the crowd, then she looked at me. You old biddy, she hissed, leaning in so only I could hear. You think you won. You just ruined the only thing this town had going for it. Good luck finding anyone to give a dime now that you've dragged the center's name through the mud. Oh, Tiffany, I said, and I couldn't help but smile a little. The center's name isn't mud. Yours is. The center is made of the people in this room, and we've got very long memories. She stormed out of the hall, the sound of her heels, a sharp, frantic clicking that faded into the night. For a moment, there was a heavy silence. Then Mr. Whittaker stood up. He looked at me, and then he looked at the whole room. June, he said, his voice thick. I don't know what to say. We should have listened to you. Should have looked closer. We let ourselves be blinded by the shiny promises, and we forgot to look at the heart of the matter. Can you ever forgive us? I looked around the room. I saw Brenda with tears in her eyes. I saw the people who had whispered about me, now looking down at their laps in shame. "It's not me you need to ask for forgiveness," I said softly. "It's the children. They're the ones who didn't get their coats. They're the ones who didn't get their music lessons." The meeting didn't end there. It turned into a town hall in the truest sense. For the next 3 hours, we sat there. We didn't talk about synergy or branding. We talked about how to fix it. I told them about the blue folder. I told them how Miss Martha used to do things. I told them that we didn't need a gala at the country club. We needed people who cared. By the time I walked out of that building, the moon was high and silver in the sky. The air had cooled down and the town was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. It felt like the air had been cleared after a long, humid spell. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The special development account was frozen. The police got involved, and let's just say Tiffany Vance didn't stay in Oakhaven for long. Last I heard, she was dealing with a whole lot of legal outreach of her own. But the most amazing thing happened right here in Oakhaven. People started showing up at my front door. First, it was Sarah from the bakery. She brought a peach cobbler, still warm from the oven. "June," she said, standing on my porch with her head down. "I'm so sorry. I should have known. I've known you my whole life, and I let a stranger's words make me doubt you. I was wrong." "Come on in, Sarah," I said. "The tea is almost ready." Then it was Mrs. Sterling. She didn't bring a cobbler, but she brought a check. A big one. "This is for the playground, June," she said. "And I'd like you to be the one to oversee where it goes. You need someone who knows how to keep her seat." One by one, the town came back. The whispers stopped. The legacy pretender labels were burned in the fires of the truth. My bridge club met again, and they even let me win a hand or two, though I suspect they were just being sweet. We reinstated the old board. We brought Miss Martha out of retirement just to consult. And we changed the name of the main hall at the center. It's not the Vance Wing anymore. Now there's a simple brass plaque over the door. It says, "The Hank and June Miller Legacy Hall, where every gift is a promise kept." I still sit on my porch every evening. I still drink my peppermint tea. And I still have my blue folder. But it's a lot thicker now. It's full of new receipts for the playground equipment, for the new library books, for the music lessons that are finally happening. Sometimes I look at the photo of Hank on the mantle and I wink at him. "We did it, Hank," I whisper. "The truth didn't just set us free, it built a playground. You know, honey, life has a way of trying to scuff your name. People will try to tell you who you are based on what they want to believe. They'll try to shame you for being quiet or old-fashioned or quaint. But don't you ever let them make you feel small. Your integrity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away. You keep your records. You keep your heart pure. You keep your blue folder ready. Because the truth doesn't have to scream to be heard. It just has to stay standing when the lies finally run out of breath. Now, let me get you a refill on that tea. I think I've got some lemon pound cake in the kitchen that's just waiting for a friend to share it with. There's a comfort in the sunset, isn't there? The way the orange and purple just soak into the trees, tucking the world in for the night. This old house has seen a lot of seasons. It's seen the lean years where we stretched a pot of beans for a week, and it's seen the years where we had enough to overflow into the lives of others. Through it all, the foundation stayed the same. That's what I learned through all that mess with the center. A life is a lot like a house. You can paint the shutters any fancy color you want, and you can put a sparkling chandelier in the window to impress the neighbors. But if the foundation is built on sand and secrets, it's eventually going to crack when the storm hits. Hank and I, we built our foundation on the truth. We built it on the quiet moments of giving when nobody was watching. And when that woman tried to shake my house, she found out that you can't knock down something that's anchored in 30 years of honesty. I look at the Grace Center now, and I don't see a brand. I see a home. I see children who know they're loved by a town that finally remembers what matters. It's a powerful thing, standing up for your name. It's not about pride, not the bad kind anyway. It's about stewardship. It's about making sure that the seeds you plant actually grow into shade for someone else. So, if you're ever feeling like the world is overlooking you, or if someone's trying to rewrite your story, you just remember Mama June. You keep your receipts, not just the paper ones, but the ones in your soul. Stay steady, stay kind, and never be afraid to open your folder and show the world exactly who you are. The truth might take its sweet time, but honey, it always finds its way home. Would you like me to tell you about the time the mayor tried to buy my back pasture for a nature preserve that turned out to be a golf course? That's a whole other pot of tea.